This is Signum Academy on Twitch, and this is our second J.K. Rowling and Harry Potter discussion. This is the last discussion that we'll do focused on just one particular author, at least for a while now. We've been going over the classic Inklings authors, that's Tolkien and Lewis. We looked at the Chronicles of Narnia in a little bit of detail, and the sequels to The Hobbit. Obviously there's way more that could be said about those two alone, but we just wanted to give sort of a introduction to the sequels to each of the books that we have on our webpage from our previous summer camps. So if you check out that page, you can see again some of our past materials and our plans for the future. This obviously was designed before all of the virus and the responses have led to maybe some changes to some of the ideas that we had, but we're just kind of finishing up with May here, and into June, the start of the summer, we'll be looking at the idea of adaptation and sort of fandoms that surround some of these books. I don't know as much about Madeleine L'Engle, whether there's an active fan community or not. Obviously Tolkien and Lewis have enormous followings. That's kind of the main subjects that you find on Signum, so if you're at all interested in them, you can find way more, like I said. And J.K. Rowling, who is our author for this month of May, well, she's got to be one of the most famous writers alive, and her fandom is enormous. Her presence in the world of entertainment is way bigger than just literature at this point. She's kind of a master of presenting Harry Potter in all of its facets, with the films and with her subsequent plays and books set in the wizarding world, roller coaster rides at Disney World, and this and that. So that's kind of the topic that I wanted to look at in June. So the next couple of meetings, the first and third Monday in June, that's what we'll be looking at. The idea of fans and communities that grow around these authors. Beyond that, I do want to continue with more literature discussions. So in July, August, might take a little break for a vacation, but probably be coming back with new material for you guys later in the summer. So do come back and check the webpage for updates on that. Alright, looks like we're streaming okay, and we should probably get into our slideshow for today. So today I wanted to give kind of an overview of the Harry Potter series, and we looked specifically at the Chamber of Secrets last time, the first sequel, the original sequel to the first Harry Potter. Talked about how it's taking some of the themes from the original and some of the structure, right? Obviously the characters, bringing that and just kind of changing it around, right? Making it a little bit more ominous, a little bit more intense, right? Now that we've been introduced to the wizarding world, what else can we play with there? So we get into a bit of the history of Hogwarts, and obviously some of that involves some dark secrets, right? The Chamber of Secrets, this evil and dangerous hidden room right underneath Hogwarts itself, right? Which is kind of the most magical and wonderful place you can imagine. But that's only extension, or it's only to go back to the very first book, where they have this room that's hidden, right? That they've hidden the Sorcerer's Stone or Philosopher's Stone away right there in Hogwarts, because it's the safest place in the world, right? Even more than Gringotts, the bank. So there's always, I guess, been this hint that maybe all is not calm, peaceful, and magical in a good way at Hogwarts, but that there is this darker side to it. So even in the very first Harry Potter, we see that a little bit. But that just comes out more and more in the Chamber of Secrets, in the Prisoner of Azkaban, and so on through the series. That aspect of the evil, the danger, the secret, the scary, it just builds in each subsequent book. And that's kind of the theme that I wanted to pick up on from last time. And I wanted to look at the Harry Potter series overall this time and think about the ways that each book develops the reality, right, to go with the magic, if I can say it that way. The reality has its good and bad parts, right? So the very first character that I wanted to look at, I wanted to do this sort of through favorite characters, and probably my very favorite character in the whole series is Hagrid. And I found this picture just doing a search. All the pictures that you'll see today come from, near the top of a search if you look for these characters. This one I think comes through the fandom page. So again, we'll talk more about like fan art and fan fiction and all that good stuff next time. But yeah, somebody did a beautiful job depicting Hagrid in the young Sirius Black lent him his motorcycle, right, his flying motorcycle here. So he's one of the first really magical things that we see in the first book. And so I'm just going to kind of look at our first impressions of some of these characters and then think about the ways that they change in the rest of the story. So I love the description that we get from Rowling here. When he's first introduced, the motorcycle landing with a thud, and the man riding it was even more immense than the giant motorcycle. He looked simply too big to be allowed. That's the picture that we're given of Hagrid, is this impression of size, massiveness, and that it's somehow not quite polite, right? And that's an idea that we'll look at actually with the Dursleys, of course, who represent the ordinary, the everyday, the normal. And so Hagrid is an affront, is an offense to the Dursley-ish way of looking at the world, the normal way, the Muggle way, right? He's too big to be allowed. He's wild-looking. He's clearly not an ordinary large person. He's something else. He's something bigger than just a big person. But as the story goes on, Hagrid is Harry's introduction to the wizarding world, right? He's the one who comes and brings Harry into Diagon Alley, right? And the Leaky Cauldron. He escorts Harry through his first kind of brush with a world that has always been there but just kind of out of sight. A world that the Dursleys have known about but not told him about all along. And of course Harry has some other magic that he does without realizing it first, right? But this is something else. Again, this is another world where people understand what the magic is all about and are keeping it secret from the ordinary world. Hagrid is an interesting person to be the guide and the kind of presentation of the wizarding world, because again, he's so out there, he's so huge, you can't miss him, right? And so to imagine him somehow being undercover in the ordinary world is absurd, He's a humorous character. He's a little bit of comic relief a lot of times. Um, he has a very particular way of speaking, which identifies him immediately. Um, it's very characteristic of Hagrid to be sort of gruff, but also sort of jolly. There's elements, I think, of the kind of Ghost of Christmas Present. That's the impression that I get. That's kind of the Hagrid that I imagined as a kid, reading the first book. That's what came to mind for me. And specifically the Ghost of Christmas Present as shown in the Muppets Christmas Carol. I don't know if you guys have seen that one. One of my favorite movies ever. So that, when we do see the movie, of course, Hagrid is presented in a way that is probably more true to what J.K. Rowling might have had in mind. I'm not sure. And in any case, he's given a kind of stamp, right, by the movie presentation. But obviously, every individual reader, like the person who drew this lovely fan art, every reader is free to imagine the characters how you want. Based on what you read and how you interpret the story and the characters, you can come up with your own pictures and your own kind of connections, which is awesome, right? So Hagrid, he's our introduction into the wizarding world. He's obviously also the one who saves Harry. He brings the little tiny child, the boy who lived, to his safe house, right, in Privet Drive. So he's this kind of Saint Christopher figure too, right? The giant who carries the Christ across the river in the old myth or legend, right? So these kind of stories of giants are there in fairy tales and in religious stories too, of course, but they're usually evil, right? And all of Hagrid's relatives are a little bit more dangerous than he is. So as the story progresses in the sequels, we learn more about Hagrid. We learn that he was expelled, and we learn more about the circumstances for why he was kicked out of school, so that he can't openly use his wand, right? He has to hide it in the pink umbrella. Again, an absurd way to try to be discreet and be secretive, right, by waving the pink umbrella around. But we learn about his role as the groundskeeper, right, for the castle, the ways that many people look down on him for that, and the ways that people who really count, like Dumbledore, really admire him and show that by giving him that kind of responsibility, right? The way he's introduced, right, Dumbledore would trust him with his life, and basically does, right? So there's a way that Hagrid is later going to be the ambassador to that world of giants, right? So he's the connection between the normal world and the wizarding world for Harry, and then he's going to be the connection between the sort of moral and civilized, right, wizarding world and the more wild and giantish wizarding world, right? So he kind of crosses these boundaries. Sometimes it gets him into trouble, gets kicked out of school, but on the other hand, along with his huge size, he has a huge spirit, a huge soul, a huge heart. I think that's why he's my favorite character, really. The kinds of chats that Harry, Ron, and Hermione have down at Hagrid's cabin, right? His big dog and his tendency to take care of really dangerous creatures and treat them as if they were cute and cuddly, right? He's got the biggest heart. So Hagrid really becomes a more interesting and more rounded character over the course of the story. But he never really loses that immensity, that impression of massiveness that hits you right at the start, and that, for me, helped bring me to, into the wizarding world of Harry Potter. Right? So during this whole discussion, I'm just going to be talking, but I hope that you guys will also be sending in your impressions and your thoughts about each of these characters as we're going along. So if you've got thoughts, questions, ideas about Hagrid, please feel free to put those in the Twitch chat thingy here. I'll try to check on them periodically, and try not to miss your questions and comments on these. So if you have any about Hagrid, just go ahead and send those. The next, probably most important characters besides Harry himself are Ron and Hermione, right? His two great friends. And these are his first impressions of these two characters. So, Ron. He was tall, thin, and gangling, right? And we first see Ron as part of this big, red-headed, loud, funny family, right? That are looking for what Harry's looking for too, the platform 9 3/4. Harry's so concerned because he can't find it. He's going to be late for the train. Well, fortunately, this other family is also running a little late, and he kind of tags along, and they show him what to do. Right. So that's Ron. And then Hermione, the first thing we see her doing is helping another kid out. Very typical, right? Has anyone seen a toad? Neville's lost one. She pops into their train compartment and is accompanying this kind of hapless boy, Neville, who is probably my second favorite character in the whole series, right after Hagrid. Sometimes I would say Neville is probably my favorite, though. And so I love that we are given our first introduction to the kids who are going to be Harry's best friends, right as he is really stepping into the wizard student sort of role, right? He is he's got all of his stuff now. Hagrid has helped him get his money and get his school supplies, and now he's getting on the train. And on the train he meets Ron and Hermione. So they're in this process together. They're going to school for the first time. They're going to learn magic at the great Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, right? Hermione has already got her robes on, right? While the other kids have been wearing like their sort of undercover clothes, but she's always ahead of the game, right? She's got her magic. She's been practicing, ahead of time, and so she's the goody two shoes. When we first meet her, she's got the bushy hair, right? So this picture is just adorable from the original Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone coming soon movie poster. There's little Hermione and little Ron sort of welcoming us, the viewer, into the world of Harry Potter. Right? And Ron, he's primarily characterized by his looks at first. That's how we can recognize him immediately. He sort of stands out, tall, thin, kind of goofy, kind of nothing special when it comes to doing magic, right? So they're an interesting pair, and they are kind of paired up immediately because Hermione barges in as Ron's about to try out a spell, right? And of course his wand is broken and he's all nervous. And so Hermione sort of looks a little bit like she's a little bit more like she's got it all together. She knows what she's doing. Ron a little bit more hapless, right? But then on the other hand, of course, Hermione comes from a Muggle family, right? She didn't know anything about wizarding until she got her letter from Hogwarts, right? Just like Harry. And Ron is from this very established, very old wizarding family, right? The Weasleys. Everyone knows the Weasley family. You can tell them right away by the red hair, right? They live in this awesome rambling house, the burrow that we get to see in the later books more of. And we do get to know each of the Weasleys a little bit better. They each are kind of dealing with that identity that comes with being part of this well-known big family, right? Of course, Harry is the most famous wizarding kid in the world, right? Although he didn't know it, right? So they're in awe of him, right? They know about him, and he doesn't really know what to do with himself. So it's great that he has these friends to kind of take him under their wing, accompany him on their first sort of entry into Hogwarts. Now, as the story goes on, they have their ups and downs, of course, right? They become fast friends, and so nothing really breaks that. But there are strains to the friendship. And I think that there aren't that many stories that I can think of that do a better job of representing how tricky it is to make friends when you're a kid, right? And grow up with those people, and you're all changing, you're all having new interests or having new problems that come up, right? And you sort of deal with them together, but you something about the friendship remains, right? And the way that this is shown throughout the different books, with all the different mayhem that surrounds them, is just really it's really educational. And frankly, these books sort of teach you what friendship looks like, how to deal with a friend who's not themselves, right? Not acting the way they used to act. And although Hermione and Ron both go through changes, have their problems, obviously it's Harry himself who really goes through the most profound changes and deals with the biggest and the deepest and darkest problems, right? And so the way that we see them sort of support him and give him tough love when he needs that, or give him a helping hand when he needs, that is really remarkable. And so if you go back and read these books again as you grow up, right, and you have more of these kind of experiences with your friends, as you make new friends and have new problems and all that good stuff, I think that you'll see that it probably impacted you quite a bit in the way that you deal with people in tough situations, right? So I just think that Ron and Hermione and Harry, of course, form a really awesome and really realistic friendship throughout the books. Of course, the fourth member in that friendship wouldn't be Neville, right? He really is the linchpin of that team, that Gryffindor team in the series. Because of course we learn, right, that Harry's father had his group of four friends, right? They were kind of inseparable, and so the current day Harry Potter's group of friends should really include Neville as well, to be a nice parallel there. All right. So if you've got more thoughts about Ron, Hermione, and especially Neville, please do add those, type those in, questions and comments on those guys. Hagrid. Dumbledore. So Professor Dumbledore is our next major character who goes through some really important development and change throughout the series. So in Dumbledore's case, the first impression that we get of him, of course, is he's actually there. That's who Hagrid is bringing Harry Potter to in this everyday sort of suburb neighborhood, right? So that's the first impression that we get of Dumbledore. So instead of that, I actually wanted to look at the first time that Harry sort of runs across Dumbledore. And this is in the form of the little card that he gets from his chocolate frog on the train, right, on the Hogwarts Express. He has all this money, so he buys a bunch of candy so he and Ron can scarf it down and play with the cards and the every flavor beans and all this stuff. So the card is like the great wizards of history, right? And this one, Dumbledore, is the one that Harry happens to get. Considered by many the greatest wizard of modern times, it begins. And then it gives a little bit of information about Dumbledore. And this is information that, seems like it might be there just kind of to fill in more about the wizarding world, and sort of give us the impression that there is a history to this world, or something like that, right? It's just for fun at first. He's particularly famous for his defeat of the dark wizard Grindelwald in 1945, for the discovery of the 12 uses of dragon's blood, and his work on alchemy with his partner, Nicholas Flamel. Professor Dumbledore enjoys chamber music and 10-pin bowling. So a little bit of trivia there. Awesome. Right. Got the half-moon glasses, a long crooked nose, flowing silver hair. Albus Dumbledore. Albus. So Albion is an old name for England. That alb, part of the word seems to connote the brightness, the shining of his silver hair, right? Like the white cliffs of Dover that people saw when they were going to England, right? So Dumbledore, his last name seems to mean like bumblebee. It's like an old word for bumblebee or something, Dumbledore, I think. So he's this very English. He's got a very long series of other names that all might refer to things, I guess. But the headmaster of the boarding school. Like, what could be more English than this guy? He is the greatest wizard, right? So the wisest. He's got these spectacles he sort of looks at you over the top of. He's discovered, made great magical discoveries about alchemy, right? So we talked a lot last time about, the Philosopher's Stone, what that kind of refers to. And this past conflict that just kind of hinted at there, that gets developed much, much more throughout the story. Dumbledore seems like he, again, has everything figured out. He's always in a good mood, always lighthearted and kind of quirky, eccentric. But he, too, has this kind of dark past that really only comes out very late in the series. So his development as a character is pretty consistent for a while there. He's there to be kind of the final words of advice at the end of each book. We have Harry and Dumbledore sort of sitting and talking over what's happened this school year, right? What death-defying escapades Harry has been getting up to, and meanwhile Dumbledore, has been wrestling with the dumb old Ministry of Magic, all their their sort of bureaucracy or whatever. So he's the kind of emblem of the school as a free and independent place where students can go to just learn in company with their friends, right? It's sort of this magical place. But he also has his secrets, right? What it took for him to defeat Grindelwald, right? What that really entailed. We just get the tiniest hints of what that was like. And he's the one who's not afraid to say whose name, right? And why is that, right? What gives him this sort of stature, this great quality? It's also to do with the sufferings that he's gone through, right? Problems that he's had. So he also has flaws, although they're not apparent at first. He is the first to admit right? That he also makes mistakes. He doesn't see everything the way that some people might imagine it he does. So this picture, of course, comes from the movies. Again, sort of giving us the image of Dumbledore. Maybe you think of a wizard sort of like Gandalf, right? The wise wizard who knows way more than everybody else. Right? A little bit overpowered, right? To use like a gaming language, he's OP. But he gets more interesting as the series goes on. In the background here, we've got Snape. And Snape, I didn't make a separate slide for him. He also, he's sort of this character that you are set up to really hate. Harry Potter and Snape don't get along. Snape seems to have some kind of grudge, right? But as the series goes on, more and more, again, his backstory is brought out, and the sort of stuff that he is dealing with that causes him to act that way. So he's one of the characters who probably changes the most in terms of how the reader sort of understands where he's coming from. But I like this kind of connection of these two characters here, right? Snape and Dumbledore. Again, like Dumbledore trusts Hagrid, even though a lot of people don't. He trusts Snape, even though everybody's trying to tell him not to. And so there they are. All right. So one of the saddest characters for me, one of the trickiest characters, I guess, is Draco. So this is more fan art, possibly by the same person, I guess, who did the other one of Hagrid. I'm sorry I didn't look up who actually drew this, but I just it struck me. This one is the one that stood out when I was looking for Draco Malfoy pictures, and I think this is kind of how I would picture him. Sort of, sunken eyes, very, very pale, almost colorless hair and eyes, so sort of like a spooky character from the very start. Now, when we're first shown Draco Malfoy, we don't know who he is. Harry Potter's first impression. In the back of the shop, a boy with a pale, pointed face was standing on a footstool. So this is in the robes, the Wizarding Robes store in Diagon Alley, and he just happens to run into this other kid who's getting his robes for school, right? And so they get to talking. Draco is very privileged, right? He is the impression Harry gets is that he reminds him of Dudley somehow, right? This kid who is spoiled by his parents, who has everything. But there's definitely a sadness to that, which I think that we see more as the story goes on. We're set up to really dislike Draco. Everything he does, he's a bully, he's a jerk, he's full of himself, stuck up, privilege in the worst way, right? But at the same time, we learn that his family, although they're very wealthy and in some ways very respected or feared, they have their dark history. They have done horrible things to get where they are, and they have never really been forced to deal with them. So the way that Dumbledore, that Snape, have kind of dealt with their pasts and grown and become much greater, right, wizards and people, the Malfoys really haven't, it seems like. They have kind of skated along and gotten by without kind of dealing with the problems that are in their past. And so Draco, when we first meet him, he seems unaware of all of that, right? He's just full of himself. But as the series goes on, and he kind of becomes more and more burdened with the family history of his father especially, but in interesting ways his mother too, sort of affects him. He really changes into a more sympathetic character. And I know that might sound weird, like if you know sort of the stuff that happens later in the series, it's maybe weird to say that we would feel sympathy for Draco, but I really think that we do. I do personally, anyway, and people I've talked to about these books. He he's a kind of, again, a kind of parallel or reflection of Harry Potter. He wants to be Harry's friend. He wants Harry to be his friend. It seems like he wants that maybe more than anything, actually, is like for people to really like him for who he is. And he's just not likable. And that's sad. That's a problem. It's partly because of the way he's brought up. Perhaps partly just his character. And the fact that he has to kind of deal with that and doesn't really know how, maybe doesn't have a good role model, like Harry does. He's got Hagrid, he's got Dumbledore, he's got Sirius, all these people looking out for him, all these great friends, Ron and Hermione, and Neville, and everybody, right? Draco doesn't have those role models. He doesn't have those good friends. Instead, he has these kind of cronies, that just like bodyguards or something, goons. So it's like if Draco could make up his mind, to be like the cartoon villain, he'd be great at that, right? And that's the way that he's kind of presented to us. But he seems to want to be the hero. He seems to want to play the role of Harry's friend, of a Ron, a Hermione, and be that friend. But he can't, because of who he is, because of who Harry Potter is. It's just not in the cards, right? It's fated that they got to be nemesis, right? So Draco Malfoy, very, very profoundly sympathetic character for me. His name, Draco, seems to refer to like dragon, right? Draconis. And Malfoy seems to mean like bad faith, right? So a traitor, a person you can't trust. Something like that. Anyway, seems to be implied by the name. And of course, another French named character, villain, Voldemort. Voldemort, if you break that down, the will of death, right? The death wish, or something like that, right? That's not his real name, as we learn. He had another name that he rejected, wanted to change his name to Lord Voldemort. And he is the great arch enemy that's in the background, in the shadows, throughout the whole series. The first impression we get of him, I think, or the one that I was most interested in anyway, as I was looking back at this, we're shown the cat reading the map, right? That's like one of the first magical things that is going on Privet Drive. That's Professor McGonagall, right, in her animagus form. And she says, when Dumbledore shows up, a fine thing it would be if, on the very day you-know-who seems to have disappeared at last, the Muggles found out about us all. Right? So, got some important sort of setup here, right? That the boy who lived, right? Everybody's celebrating at the very start in the Wizarding world. The Muggles are very confused about what's going on. And in some way, right, Voldemort has been terrorizing them. He's horrible. He's so scary. They can't even say his name, right? Except Dumbledore, who's not afraid. But there's like this danger, right? That if you get rid of Voldemort, people will lose their minds. They'll be so happy that they will blow their cover, right? They will celebrate too much, and there'll be this kind of irony of the even greater danger of letting everyday people know that there's wizards, right? There's a whole wizarding world out there. So as afraid of Voldemort as people are, they seem more afraid, actually, of ordinary business, government, who knows, media, right? All of these things that we deal with every day, right, are more dangerous than even you-know-who, right? So I just think that's such an interesting kind of problem that's in the background of the whole series, right? What's the relationship between the Muggles and the wizards? Why are the wizards hiding from the Muggles? Why are they taking these elaborate precautions to make their existence secret, right? And make magic itself a secret power that's not shared with ordinary people. Right? It seems to do with the danger of people knowing too much, the danger of knowledge, which is a weird way to think about it, because the whole book is, the whole story is about kids going to learn magic, right? It's sort of whimsical, it's fun, you go to Hogwarts, but again, inside of Hogwarts there's dangerous things. Within the magic books there's spells that are so deadly that the books have to be locked up. You're not allowed to even take them out, right, from the library, right? So there's this idea that that secrets are powerful, right, and that you can't just share that power with anybody, just anybody. You have to be careful with who you're sharing this knowledge with. Right? It goes back to the alchemy image, right? The philosopher's stone, the sorcerer's stone. It's this kind of secret knowledge. So Dumbledore and his partner Nicholas Flamel sort of cracked it. They figured it out, right? But they keep it to themselves. They don't just share that elixir of life, that infinite wealth with just everybody, right? So anyway, Voldemort is, again, like Dumbledore, he's going to pop up in every book, sort of towards the end. There'll be this major kind of conflict. Harry Potter has to grow and become better as a wizard, become smarter, become faster, right, on the draw to face Voldemort each time, or whatever sort of form that Voldemort takes. And this is from, of course, the final book. It's like a poster version, so for some reason Harry Potter isn't actually there. The words Harry Potter, that is. But this shows a really clearly the back cover, right? This sort of shadowy, cloaked figure. So if Hagrid is the Ghost of Christmas Present, right, the big jolly green giant sort of thing, Voldemort is clearly the Ghost of Christmas Future. Right? He's the cloaked, hooded figure of death. He's the kind of symbol of death and despair and evil, right? And so in this way, I mean, to me, Voldemort is actually a little bit less interesting than all the other characters we've been talking about, because he's so, sort of comic book villain, supervillain. There are ways that he is sympathetic, right? That we learn a little bit more about his family and things that he's dealt with, but he has just gone so far to the kinds of things that he's done that there's really it's very, very difficult for me to find anything really redeeming about his character. So the way that he develops and grows is really just to show us more about why he is as terrible as he initially seems, right? To basically, be attempting to murder this completely innocent child, Harry Potter, right? And having the spell rebound against him. So from the beginning, I guess the most interesting thing to me about Voldemort, again, how he's connected with the knowledge of wizarding in general, and like how that's secret from the Muggles, but also, of course, he's connected with Harry Potter too. Right? So he's this kind of parallel image of Harry. When that spell bounces back, it forms this link, right, that we learn more and more about as we go along. The ways that he kind of imprints his power onto Harry, and Harry has this kind of reverse impact on him. That's kind of the central mystery of the whole series, is like what happened in that moment and how can Harry grow and deal with it, right? And so as we go along through the books, we learn more and more about that sort of central mystery. But I don't think that J.K. Rowling ever fully explains it, which I like. I think is cool. For me, at least, the mystery of that magic and of magic in general, like why does it work? What's it do? It's never fully clear. It's always a little bit sort of hand waving, a little bit mysterious. And I mean, personally, I like that a lot. Obviously, a lot of people like that, right? These books are ridiculously popular. Nobody really seems to have a big problem with the fact that magic is not explained. That's sort of like the point, I think. That's what makes it magical. So, all right. So there's just a couple more characters and topics I wanted to look at for the idea of how they develop, how from our first impression. The Fantastic Beasts. I think it's really cool that J.K. Rowling has continued to put out new stories. And the way that she's done this, I think, is really interesting through a version of books that are mentioned in her story, right? So she goes and writes the book that exists in the world of Harry Potter. I think it's so cool. And so she writes as these other characters who've written these books. Right? So Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them is one of the books that students are supposed to bring with them to Hogwarts. It's one of their school textbooks, right? And so then J.K. Rowling goes and actually writes the book later. And that's kind of the seed of the new series of movies, right? The Grindelwald series is set in this time of when this book is supposed to come from. The Fantastic Beasts book is written by like the good guy, the main character, Newt Scamander, of the new movies. So it's like that previous, or not just the previous generation, but Dumbledore's kind of heyday as a great wizard. That generation around the World War II time. So I haven't actually read Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. I'm afraid I am not ready for my first year of Hogwarts. I don't have the book. I haven't read it. And the other one I know of is Beetle the Bard, right? The Tales of Beetle the Bard, which is like this really important clue to like solving the mystery in the final book, The Deathly Hallows, right? So it's a book that Hermione is sort of like responsible for like figuring out the mystery there. So I mean, I really probably should read that one too at some point. So I don't know if you guys have read these ones, if there's others by now. I know there's The Cursed Child also, but I don't know if did J.K. Rowling actually write The Cursed Child, or did somebody else write that script? I don't. So I haven't been keeping up after the main series. I read the original 7 books, saw a bunch of the movies, but not all of them. But anyway, so the way that this, like, again, this little tiny thing, like the card from the Chocolate Frog, or this book that's on their book list, J.K. Rowling develops that into this whole real thing eventually, which is awesome. I also really like that at the bottom of the book list, it mentions that students may also bring an owl or a cat or a toad. I love the way that these documents, right, like the book list, the Chocolate Frog, these or the writing on the wall that we talked about last time, the diary, right? All these kind of written documents find their way into the story and then help develop the world and storyline itself, right? Like the actual plot a lot of times depends on these clues that are in the books, inside the book. Clearly, J.K. Rowling has a love of writing and reading that is clearly part of the magic here. And what we're doing is, as we're reading these books, maybe as kids, we're just sort of like in love with the wonder, just want to see what happens next, and the story carries us along, right? But the way that these books really grow up with us, they get darker each book, right? There's more and more stuff that you won't notice on a first reading, especially if you're a kid. But if you go back, you read it again, you read it carefully, with the kind of attention that she clearly has put into writing it, I think that you get some very, very interesting knowledge about, not just like magic, right? But the magic of learning, the magic of seeing dangerous animals and just thinking, oh, like that's so cool. Like I want to understand that scary thing, like Hagrid would, or like Newt Scamander would. So that kind of love of apparently dangerous, scary things is pretty strongly emphasized in the whole Fantastic Beasts. Right, the owl, the cat, the toad, these kind of like demon familiars, right? These creatures like witches would have their cat, right, or their toad. And of course Harry has an owl, like very regal, very beautiful. Hedwig, great character in the series. So there's the Fantastic Beasts. The last little topic here is the one that I've been sort of pointing back to throughout here as we've been going along, and that's the Dursleys. So the final character I actually think is one of my favorites in terms of how they develop throughout the story, is actually the Dursleys. They're the very first thing that we see when we start the first book. First sentence on the first page: Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive were proud to say that they were perfectly normal. Thank you very much. All right. So the setup there, the Dursleys represent everyday, ordinary, normal, right? That's, for them, that's a good thing. They're proud of it. They're proud to say it, right? And yet, right, they are the place that Dumbledore chooses to bring the boy who lived, right, Harry Potter, so that he'll be safe there. There's a power in the family connection that is deeper, right, than the appearance of normality that they put on. So again, this idea of like a family secret, right? Even the Dursleys have got their family secrets. And I love that the people that are supposed to seem completely ordinary are actually just trying really hard to look ordinary. I think that we can really easily forget that and assume that because, other people look really ordinary, they actually are. They're really normal, they're boring, they can easily be dismissed, right? We would have nothing to talk about because we're weird and nerdy and like reading books, whatever. So, but that's as big of a mistake as it would be to look at the dragon, the baby dragon that's hatched, and say, oh, like that's too dangerous. I don't want to, take care of that creature, or Hagrid with the giant spiders. Like, for goodness sake, it's because he can find this kind of connection to even scary, dangerous things, right, that he is such a wonderful character. And so actually I think in the same way, the challenge, the ultimate challenge of these books might be to sort of look at not the scary and magical things and make a connection with those, but actually to look at the everyday ordinary things and make a deep connection with those. That seems to be, in a way, the great sort of problem with the wizarding world, right? The wizarding world can't share its truth with the outside world. they don't trust them. They know that there would be chaos, right, if people knew that magic was real. Um, but to me, what we see is that in individual cases, there are these kind of connections that are possible, right? There's wizards who are very negative towards muggles, right, and call them really nasty names, right, like Draco, and Hermione. They just don't get along. He's very prejudiced against muggle-born wizards, and Voldemort's kind of big evil plan seems to be to just dominate, right, and maybe kill or enslave the non-magical people, and all the magical people too, I guess. But that isn't the only possible answer, right? Hostility and violence and hatred is something that the wizarding world is afraid of, but that we see, Harry, even though he's like not treated well by the Dursleys, he can find forgiveness ultimately. He and Dudley, his tormentor, this kid he always thought, he hated, they can actually make friends in a way by the end. So the development of the Dursleys and what they represent in the story, I think, is really, really important. And it's the aspect of the Harry Potter world that, for me, I think it might be most interesting, right? Like the way that the magical and the ordinary overlap, conflict, but also can find some kind of understanding. So that's my, my thoughts as a person who just grew up with these books, right? I was a kid when they came out, and each time a new book would come out, I would read it, until by the time the last one came out, I was, probably too old for the marketing of the books. But clearly, these books have had a really big impact on people of all ages. And so when you think about, great fantasy writing and great fantasy fiction, J.K. Rowling has got to be near the top of the list, right? She is probably most people's first or favorite, fantasy author. And she's brought so many people into this kind of literature, right? This magical world, right? That we like weird kind of quote unquote nerdy or geeky people, we love reading these books, but maybe we aren't always that good at talking about them with other people who might not know as much about these books, right? That's where J.K. Rowling is such a great sort of Hagrid, like welcoming people in to the world of fantasy literature. That's what we are attempting to do here at Signum Academy, right? We want to welcome more people of all ages into the world of fantasy literature, science fiction literature, and just consider that you might like, talking about these books, reading them again, going back and really studying them and thinking hard about them. That's given me and a lot of people at Signum a lot of joy, and obviously it's something that we love doing and love sharing with everybody. So if you get the chance, do check out the Signum Academy website and see what's going on here as we come into the summer. Thanks very much, all you guys who have tuned in or watch this later. If you ever do have questions, comments, you can send them along to our email. So find signumuniversity.org/academy. If you've got questions, you want to see our past programs, if you want to send us any questions or requests, that's where you can do that. All right. So till next time, take care of yourselves.